Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to your Valentine's Views podcast for Friday. Please like, share, and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts across the big Blue View Radio network. All right, it's really unfortunate. It's the off season. There's absolutely nothing going on with the New York Giants, and I have the great Patricia Traina here with me, but I have no idea what we're going to talk about for the next half an hour, Patty. Haven't got a clue what there is to talk about with the Giants. Have you?
Not really. I don't know, man.
No, I don't know. We'll just sit here and stare at each other for the next half an hour, Patty.
Oh, I don't know if I could take that.
That would make great entertainment. See which one of us cracks first.
Probably would be me.
I don't know about that either, but I never win staring contests, but that's
Nah.
no, it is what it is. But anyway, Patty, actually, as Giants fans know, we do have quite a bit to talk about. It has been a wild start to the off season for your New York Giants, and obviously that all starts with coaching changes, and the big one, of course, is what has happened with Wink Martindale, that whole situation with Brian Daboll saying on Monday he expected Wink to be back next season. I think we could see through that. And I think we saw through that as soon as we found out about the Wilkins brothers being fired later on Monday, more or less just putting the ball in Wink's court, more or less. But Patty, just your take on that whole situation and whether the ugly divorce between Daboll and Martindale was was inevitable.
I think the best way to sum it up is it's unfortunate. You have two grown men who are not strangers to the way the world works, and that one of them, and I'm obviously citing the New York Post report written by Paul Schwartz that alleged that Wink Martindale felt that he didn't have to be as accountable to Daboll as he did necessarily to ownership. That one of them just felt that way, allegedly again.
Mm-hmm.
Very unfortunate because look, I don't know what world they live in, but I know the world I live in. If my boss tells me to do something and I disagree, doesn't matter. Got to do it. If I want to keep my job, got to do it.
Right.
And just the fact that, look, I admire Wink because he believes in the Wilkins brothers, they're tight and everything like that. And some people will say, oh, he was sticking up for his guys. But if those guys were dismissed because they were insubordinate or they weren't good at their jobs, ultimately, at the end of the day, that's Daboll's call because This is his show that he's running. And for Wink to allegedly flip out on him, as has been reported, that's not good. That's immaturity. That's just not a good look. And, if that's how it all went down, then it's unfortunate.
Right. In every industry that there is, Patty, there are bosses and there are employees. And oftentimes your boss might not know as much about your particular job or your particular role as you do. But your boss has the right to walk into your office or sit down at your cubicle and talk to you about that job, talk to you about that role, talk to you about what direction he might like to see. And if you have to be able to handle that. You have to be able to expect that. That's as I said, there are bosses and there are employees. And Brian Daboll perfectly within his rights to sit down and say, if for example he wanted to say, Wink, let's play a little softer this weekend or this week. Let's be a little bit more conservative. Let's dial it back a little bit this week. And if that's what he wants, that's what he wants. And he's within his rights to do that. So, and if you're going to work for somebody, you have to be willing to accept that.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's a lesson for what it's worth. I know I learned at a young age. I was working before I got into sports writing, I was working for a company, and they brought in this new boss who thought she knew everything. And, she started to tell me how to do certain things. I mean, I had a specific niche that I filled, and she started to tell me how to do things. And at the time I was young, I didn't know any better. And I would say, but look, that's not how you do it. This is how you do it, and this is why you do it this way. And you just can't do that. You can't do that. I mean, you could disagree, but ultimately, if it works or if it doesn't work, it falls on your boss. It doesn't necessarily fall on you if you are following marching orders. Now, some people will say, well, yeah, it can fall on you, but ultimately, who are the higher ups going to look at? They're going to look at the guy or gal who's managing the party, so to speak. So,
Right. So it is what it is, and I think that for for months now, ever since the Glazer report, sort of about the relationship between Wink and Daboll came out, there was this impression that it was Daboll who was overly harsh on employees, that it was Daboll that was hard to get along with, hard to work for, that was a guy that might be driving good coaches away. And I don't know about you, Patty, but I probably fell into that narrative a little bit because that's what we heard and that's what we saw. But I feel a little differently now. Now that we've seen all of the reporting, now that we've seen more of the information, I still feel like heading into 2024, there's a lot of pressure on Brian Daboll in year 3 to get things right. But I feel like I understand more about why this all took place, and I'm putting a whole lot less of the blame at the feet of Brian Daboll.
yeah, I mean, look, last year was not a very good season for the Giants. We all know that. And when losing starts to seep in, guess what? Tempers get shorter. People are looking for answers and they want answers yesterday. So the pressure gets turned up. And Brian Dable has always been a coach who's been about collaboration. He turns to his assistants and says, okay, guys, gals, what can we do better to stop this bleeding? What can we do to get back on track? All right. Now, if that is perceived as being harder on them because he's looking for answers that maybe they don't have the answers to, then it is what it is. If it means that, he's short-tempered, well, who's going to be happy with losing? You name me one coach who's all, happy and joyous and singing kumbaya with his staff if they're losing. I don't know of any. And all the years I've covered the team. So, can Dable, does Dable have a temper? Yes, we've seen it.
Mhm.
But he also has said when we have asked him about it, is it's done in the heat of the moment. It's not personal. And if people are taking it personally, that's on them. And, Dable at the end of the day has always been about, like I said, collaboration, doing what's best in the best interest of the organization. And if people don't want to believe that or embrace that, then that's on them than it is more so on him.
No, and he walked in the door talking about relationship building and his reputation, and what we see is that he goes out of his way to build relationships. The other
Mhm.
day, we saw we saw Daboll standing in the locker room on Monday, you know, giving player after player hugs
Mhm.
as they left for the offseason, telling them how much he appreciated them. And you can tell that there's a relationship between Daboll and the players. And what you've always heard prior to all of this is that he goes out of his way to make connections around the building, which makes people feel part of it. So yeah, I'm sure he's hard on the people who work for him directly, because you know what? If they don't have the answers, that impacts his ability to do his job and keep his job. So because it's as coaches will always say, we know it's a results oriented business. They don't win, they don't keep their jobs. And Daboll knows that eventually, if he doesn't win enough, he doesn't get to stay.
Exactly. And he's trying to do his job, like you said. And you can't have people that are trying to undermine you or don't think they need to be held accountable, to you, or who try to, go above your head. He doesn't need that. That's political, stuff. And there's no room for that. You only have 17 games in the course of a season to make your case as to why you belong in the postseason. When you start introducing all that other stuff, that's when you as a leader have got to say, all right, guys, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I hear you. Almost got you to swear there, Patty. Almost. I
Not
heard it
quite.
almost come out. Almost.
Nope.
Almost.
Nope. This is a PG rated show.
I'm glad that you're putting the rating on my show, Patty.
Well, I mean, is it not a PG rated show?
Of course it is.
Okay.
Of course it is.
All right.
So we appreciate that. We appreciate the filter.
Okay. And by the way, congratulations on reading my mind. Because I was thinking of a swear word, but I said, nah, I
Oh,
couldn't say it.
I could tell by the hesitation there, Patty. I could tell. But we appreciate the filter. We do.
Okay.
All right, Patty, let's spin forward a little bit. We've seen obviously a lot of turnover on the Giants coaching staff already. We know we know the Giants need a new defensive coordinator. We know they need a new special teams coordinator. We know they need a new offensive line coach. With Mike Kafka getting at least one interview and maybe more for head coaching jobs, and who knows, maybe when the college coaching carousel is done spinning, maybe Mike decides to look in that direction. But a lot of turnover. Just I'm curious for your thoughts on some of the names, some of the people that leap to mind, as people who might fill some of these roles, and how you think Brian Daboll might go about this. I mean, we can start with defensive coordinator. I mean, just give me 2 or 3 people you think should be at the top of the list.
Well, I think the obvious name that everybody's going to look to is Leslie Frazier, who was with Daboll up in Buffalo. He knows him. He knows how he works, how he thinks, went up against him in practice, when they were with the Bills. So, the question there, though, is Leslie Frazier ran a 4-3 up in Buffalo. The Giants for the last several years have run a 3-4. That's not to say that Leslie Frazier couldn't run a 3-4 down here, but does he, if he were to come on board, tell Daboll, hey, listen, I think we would be better off with a 4-3, and how much does that set everything back? All right. Another name that has been kind of linked to the Giants has been Antonio Pierce, who right now is the interim head coach of the Raiders. And if the Raiders don't retain him, will the Giants have interest in him? Pierce, I covered him in 2007. I think you were on the beat in 2007. Super smart guy. I mean, just his football knowledge, the way he was able to diagnose plays. I mean, Steve Spagnuolo often called him a coach on the field, like an extension of him. The question there, though, is, again, Pierce has only played in a 4-3 defense when he was with the Giants, and I think before that with Washington. Could he adapt to a 3-4 if he needed to? He probably could, but how much of an adjustment would that take? And then the other matter is would the Raiders even grant him permission to interview for a DC position? Because it's kind of a step down from interim head coach. If it were for a head coach position, they couldn't really block him. So, you have that question involved. And, I think this is going to be a really, it's going to be a really critical hire because, look, if the Giants bring on a rookie quarterback in 2024, which I think a lot of us believe will be the case, Daboll's going to want to be all hands involved with that quarterback. And I think he's going to probably want to be in a scenario where he doesn't have to worry as much about the defense, turn it over to somebody who knows what they're doing, who can manage it with minimal, input from him and whatnot. Obviously keep, the communications open, but, not have Daboll have to hold his hand, so to speak. So I think, maybe the experience aspect is going to really come into play there. And that's not to say that AP couldn't do the job. Like I said, he's got experience with calling defenses and whatnot, but I think maybe Daboll, I could see him leaning more towards his pass because it is a pivotal year for him coming up. And, you know, now's not the time to really take gambles, if you will, with your staff.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Leslie Frazier name keeps coming up, but Leslie Frazier also wants to be a head coach, and I know that he's making the head coaching interview rounds these days as well. So my guess on the whole thing, Patty, is that it's going to take a little while. There's so many openings and so much going on right now. I mean, in all honesty, on a side topic, how historic is it over the last couple days that we've seen Nick Saban decide to retire at Alabama? We've seen Bill Belichick, maybe the greatest NFL head coach of all time, leave the Patriots. We've seen Pete Carroll in Seattle basically get ousted after 14 years there. I mean, it's just been a crazy, crazy week on the coaching carousel. Crazier than normal, I guess, even.
Yeah, what off season, right?
Absolutely. I don't know what the off season really is, Patty. It's funny. I tell people all the time, people say to me, and I'm sure they ask you write about football all year long. You write about the Giants all year, but there's no games. What do you do when the games are over with? And you pray for most of the year, you work just as hard, you work just as
Definitely.
much. It's just that what you're doing and the type of stories that you're writing and pursuing are a little bit different.
Plus, you're not running back and forth to East Rutherford for games and practices.
Right. So it changes, but it doesn't stop.
Exactly.
Anyway, Patty, let's talk a little bit about offensive line. And I think I want to throw one name out here. Bobby Johnson was obviously there for the last 2 years, obviously had a connection with Daboll. Probably wasn't easy for Daboll to move on from Bobby Johnson. The name that everybody keeps circling back to is Mike Munchak, former Hall of Fame player, guy who's been highly successful in a number of stops as an offensive line coach, guy who's been out of it for a couple of years to deal with some physical issues, but all reports are that he wants back in. And it's easy to say, oh, go get Mike Munchak. But you know what? There's 7, 8, 10, 12 teams probably that are going to be looking for offensive line coaches. There's all kinds of openings now and that are being created. And it might be a great hire if the Giants can get him, but they're not going to be able to snap their fingers and make that happen because he's going to have options and he's going to be able to more or less decide what he wants to do and who he wants to do it with.
Yeah, I mean, I would think the only way you have a chance to maybe land him is if you say to him, "Okay, in addition to being the offensive line coach, you're gonna be an associate head coach or assistant head coach." Just kinda sweeten the pot a little bit. But, a guy that I looked at, and I if I'm not mistaken, I think you might have written about him as well. I know I talked about him on my podcast and wrote about him as well. Comes from the college ranks, and a guy that I'm very intrigued with is Washington Husky offensive line coach Scott Huff. I mean, I was
Absolutely.
looking up his resume and what he's been able to do. He's put 7 Huskies in the NFL, 7 Husky offensive linemen in the NFL. He was retained when they underwent a head coaching switch. I mean, they just won the award for the best offensive line in the country. I think they've allowed 12 sacks this past season, and I think what was it, 7 the year before? It was a low number. I don't remember the exact number. And you look at where the Giants are at right now, they've got a lot of young talent that needs developing. Evan Neal, Joshua Azudu, Marcus McKeithen, they'll probably draft and add another guy. So when you talk about matching them up, the need with the experience, yes, Mike Munchak would make a great addition. If they can get him, I say throw the bag at him and do what you can to get him. But if you can't get him, why not see if Scott Huff might be interested in coming your way?
Absolutely. I'm glad that you went there, Patty, because that is a name that I mentioned the other day as well. Might be, I don't probably one of the best offensive line coaches in football, in college football. A lot of guys that have gone through there are now in the NFL or have had at least cups of coffee in the NFL. And Joe Shane mentioned it the other day. I mean, he didn't belabor the point, but you're right. There's 4 players that Joe drafted over the last 2 years, and he's probably going to draft 1 or 2 more this spring. And the biggest issue, I mean, we all see the performance that the Giants offensive line put forth over this past season. And we can talk about twists and stunts and this and that. And this guy wasn't good enough. And Josh Azudu shouldn't have been playing left tackle and all of that. For me, the biggest issue is this. Joe Shane put a lot of draft capital into rebuilding this offensive line. And for me, this even extends to John Michael Schmitz. I will make the argument that none of those players have gotten better since they walked in the door.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. You
Mhm.
need I've heard, Patty, I've heard people say, what about Dave DeGuglielmo? Googs from, who took over for Mark Colombo a couple of years ago. He's been out of the NFL a couple of years working in college jobs. My problem with that is, do you remember what DeGuglielmo said to us the first time we talked to him? He said, I hate rookies. Rookies belong over there in the corner where I don't have to look at them.
Yeah.
You can't put a guy with that sort of, I want veteran players who already know what they're doing kind of attitude in charge of this line. So for me, it's somebody that can connect with young players is really what that offensive line needs to me.
Absolutely, because if you think about it, they're not that far removed from their college careers. So, you continue developing them, and you need somebody who's obviously can say, "Okay, here it's a little different in the NFL. This is what you need to expect." But you go back and you just look at the lack of progress that the Giants offensive line has made under Bobby Johnson. I mean, when was the last time in the last 2 years that that line picked up a stunt, regardless of the combination? I'm hard pressed to remember, right?
Right.
And then here's the other thing, you had veterans that weren't looking, as sharp as they could be. Like, for example, Justin Pugh. There were times when Justin Pugh, who's a veteran, looked like he was lost. It was like, like very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
So get somebody in there who's a good teacher, who can simplify things. Football doesn't have to be difficult. At the end of the day, what is the offensive lineman's role? To get in front of the defensive guy, whether it be a linebacker or a defensive lineman, and keep them out of the backfield. Get them out of the way so that your guys can go and move the chains. That's all it takes. The technique and stuff that will all, fall into place depending on, who the coach is and what his philosophies are. But this doesn't have to be complicated.
No, it doesn't. And you're right. I mean, the twists and stunts and things like that. I mean, we can talk about, if you're talking specifically offensive line, I think we both had issues with a lot of the decisions that got made, personnel decisions, lineup decisions, on and on and on and on. But the bottom line is, these are professional NFL offensive linemen who should be able to pick up a twist. They,
Yeah.
they should be able to do that. And
Mhm.
there were far too many of those breakdowns and far too many free runners. And I'm a big proponent of, get somebody in there who knows how to deal with young players and can develop the guys that the Giants have already drafted and are going to draft.
Right, and then, a college coach who's relatively young, like a Scott Huff, he's gonna grow into the role too. So,
Mhm.
it's not like he's gonna be forever young. I mean, as much as maybe we all wanna be forever young, you grow into the role too. I mean, coaching, you don't walk in as a coach and profess that you know everything. Every coach will tell you that he learned something new, something that the opponent did, or maybe he finds a new drill to work with. And it doesn't matter, again, how many years experience the coach has had. So you need somebody who's like open-minded to that degree and who's willing to be patient. That's the biggest thing. Be patient with these guys because if they're not getting it, I had a reader actually contact me and he says, "Well, I'm a teacher. I used to be a teacher," and he was basically putting the blame on the students. And I said to him, "Listen, if you get up there and you present a clear lesson and you tell the students, okay, we're going to take a test now, and your students don't study or prepare, who is that on? Is that on you or on them?" So it kind of works both ways. And I think the players that the Giants have on the offensive line, they really wanted to, make it work. They wanted to do well because look, it's about pride. But it's like if you're confused, if you don't know what to do, I wanted to do great in math when I was a freshman in high school. Math was never my best subject. I wanted to do well, but I had a teacher who was just awful, who didn't explain stuff, and I would sit there and I would look and I would be like, "What the heck are we doing here?" And when I finally got a good teacher who explained how to break down mathematical problems, hey, guess what? I suddenly became good in math.
I never became good in math, Patty. I had one of those teachers too in high school, and it's the only time I ever had to go to summer school because I just could not get it. I couldn't get it. Couldn't
I
have. Never happened. But
I had to become good in math. You know why? Because my cousin, my late cousin, who passed away a couple of years ago, brilliant mathematician. He was actually the department chair at one of the colleges in New York City. So whenever I had problems, I remember, my mom would call him up and say, "Could you explain to her how to do this?" And he would get on the phone, and he was a brilliant, brilliant professor. I mean, he would make it so simple that, I probably could have done the math problems and solved them if I had been half asleep, which oftentimes I
well,
was.
part of the job of teaching or coaching, Patty, is to be, I guess I'll use the word malleable enough to realize that not everyone in front of you is going to learn at the same pace. Not everyone
Mhm.
in front of you is going to learn in the same way. And to figure out what it is that makes that person tick and how you can reach that person and how you can make that person better, how you can get the material to that person. And that's all part of what you have to be when you're a coach. You have to figure that out.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Anyway, Patty, I wanted to ask you, we'll talk about special teams for just a second. Yeah, special teams is harder to put together a list. It's harder to peg, you know, well, let's bring in this guy or let's talk about that guy. But I do know one name that I would love to see Brian Daboll reach out to, considering, and this popped up the other day when Pete Carroll when Pete Carroll was removed from the Seattle job. I think you know who
Izzo.
I'm talking. Izzo, Larry Izzo. Though his special teams in Seattle have been among the best year after year after year. He did work with the Giants for a couple of years at the beginning of his coaching career. Great special teams player. I would love to see the Giants talk to Izzo.
So would I. I mean, and he's young enough to where, he can still relate to the players. He played the game, which is
Mhm.
important. I think if you ask a lot of players, if you had your druthers in terms of a coach, would you want somebody who actually played the game or somebody who didn't? They'll probably tell you they'd want somebody who played the game. I'd be all in favor of Izzo getting an interview and potentially the job.
Mhm. Patty, last couple of things here. Just, sort of wrapping up, putting a bow on the season, kind of, how happy were you to see Sterling Shepard have a good day at the stadium on Sunday, to move past Jeremy Shockey, to get the kind of attention he got from his teammates and basically put a good ending to his Giants career.
Ed, I have said so many times, and it's funny. People ask me who are my favorites, and I try not to play favorites because you want to be objective. But I have always had the utmost respect for Sterling Shepard. He'll tell you, And I remember this very fondly too. When he was drafted, I believe I was the first Giants reporter to interview him. And right from that day, we had a wonderful discussion. This was back when I was with Bleacher Report, and we just hit it off. And as he, grew up, so to speak, because remember, he came in as a kid and he grew into, he became a husband, a father, a team leader and everything like that. And just to watch him grow up, I always tell people that's one of the most rewarding things for me personally doing this type of work is to watch these guys come in and watch them mature. Now, some of them unfortunately don't mature the way they should. They go down the wrong path. A lot of them fortunately do go the right way. And, after in the post-game locker room, I probably shouldn't tell this story, but I'm going to do it because at the end of the day, it's all about human to human. I told Sterling Shepard, I said to him, I am so proud of you for what you have overcome, for what you have done, for the examples you set. I said, you were never voted a captain. You didn't need that C on your chest. I said, I'm proud of you that you didn't give up. Because, we remember he said he thought about calling it quits after he had the ACL and he didn't. I said, I'm proud of you for not giving up. I said, you are going to be missed tremendously. And, talking to Jalen Hyatt, who had a locker next to Shep. I mean, Shep was his mentor. And he told me, we were kidding around, and I said to him, boy, you're not going to have this guy here next to you next year. What are you going to do? He says, I really want to keep the locker open. He says, I want to remember, the conversations and whatnot. And it just goes to show you the level of respect Shepard had in that locker room, not just from his teammates, but from the organization, the coaches who brought him back, despite the fact that he wasn't going to have much of a role this year. That speaks volumes. So congratulations to Sterling Shepard. I'm very, very sad to see him go, but hopefully we will see him around the facility when we all get back in the spring.
You're right, Patty. I had a similar conversation with Wandale Robinson just about his respect for Shep and the fact that they had gone through their ACL rehabs together and all of that. And people ask me all the time, am I a fan? Whatever, am I a fan? Am I a reporter? Whatever. And what I say is this: you can't do this job and and put your heart out there. You can't root for teams. You can't do it that way. But what you can do is root for and appreciate people. And Shep, there's a few guys in that locker room right now who are guys that I absolutely root for. Shep has to be in that category. There's a lot of, some guys you've dealt with over the years, there's some really, really good people that
Yeah.
come through that locker
Nick
room.
Gates was one.
Yep. There's there Steve Weatherford was one, going back a ways, but there's also some people that you'd rather not come across too. And
Yeah,
and and you do root for good people, and Shep was good people.
absolutely. And at the end of the day, that's what this is. People say, okay, yeah, we have to be objective as reporters. And yes, I question why the Giants had Shep on the roster when they had so many other needs. But that didn't mean that I didn't respect him, nor did I feel that he wasn't deserving. You got to separate the business from the personal aspect. But at the end of the day, we're all people. And I tell young reporters this all the time. I say, you know what? You want to be successful in the business. It all starts with the fundamentals. And what are the fundamentals? Being respectful of the people that you're dealing with and not being, this high and mighty, arrogant person that you're going to put these guys on trial with your line of questioning or how you talk to them.
Absolutely. Anyway, Patty, I think that's a good place for us to call it a day. Always appreciate your time, and I'm sure that during the off season we might do this a couple more times.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
All right, Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.